Hello and welcome to Broads and Books. I'm Erin.
And I'm Amy. And this is a special Broads and Books bonus episode.
Today on the Broads Talk Books With, we've got Amy Gentry, and I am beyond excited.
So is Ziggy. He just jumped up on the table to say hi.
He's about
to
it.
us. Yeah.
He knows how great she is.
You recommended Amy Gentry's book, Bad Habits, a few episodes ago in episode number 79. And I also read her past two books, and damn.
Right? They're so good.
They're so good.
So good. And like we found with most of our interviews, the author we admire is a freaking cool person.
Person.
Not only is she great at writing, she's just a killer human being.
Mm-hmm. We got Amy on Zoom, and she told us about her favorite books, past and present, how reading all different kinds of genres is super satisfying, and cake.
We've put all the books that Amy mentions in the show notes so you can add them all to your to-be-read pile.
And now, here's our interview with Amy Gentry. Why don't we start with thinking about you growing up? Did you have a favorite book or books as a kid or a teen that really pops out at you?
Yeah, I had one real favorite that started when I was a kid. I think I was maybe in third grade. My mom bought a bunch of books at a used bookstore just without knowing what they were and brought them home. And they all had to do with unicorns and stuff. And she brought The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. Well, it was also a movie. It was a cartoon movie in the 80s. So I actually wrote an article about the film too, because it's an amazing film.
Okay, I'm gonna look that up.
But the book is really beautiful. It's one of the classics of fantasy. People like Neil Gaiman constantly cite it as like their favorite. And I just discovered it at this really young age. And it's actually a quite adult book. It has really these like melancholy themes running through it. And the first line is just branded on my memory forever. It is, "The unicorn lived in a lilac wood and she lived all alone." And clearly, I know, I was clearly a very emo child already because it just spoke to me so immediately. And I used to just read it out loud, like in the mornings before anyone woke up. I would just read this book aloud over and over. Oh. And I think even though I had a lot of other, I read a lot of stuff and I had a lot of favorite reads like every kid. But yeah, something about that book really lodged itself in my brain. And I think it tapped into feelings I was already having and just gave me some really beautiful language and kind of mature, thoughts and ideas about those things. So, and it's a fairy tale essentially. Yeah. So it has this timeless quality too. So
isn't that amazing that sometimes the book you need will find you just at the right time? Like how random that is, but really cool.
I know, really strange. Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, right? Well, we talked a lot about, in different conversations with different authors and sometimes listeners, about classics that they struggled with, that maybe were a little bit of a roadblock in their reading journey. Maybe they were introduced to it too soon, something like that. We talked a lot about Moby Dick being ours. Is there a classic you remember struggling with, or a time you remember feeling like this book isn't speaking to me?
It's funny. I tried Moby Dick when I was extremely young, but because a kid on the bus, I was in fourth grade, I remember, maybe it was fifth grade, but I think it was fourth. And there was this other kid who was reading Moby Dick on the bus and really liked it. And he recommended it to me. And I liked reading a lot. And I was like, this is a big book, I'll try it. And I couldn't make heads or tails of it. And even when I read it later, I really couldn't. So it's due for a reread. But I'm trying to think of one in high school. It's funny because a lot of the books we read in high school, I remember reading Jane Eyre, for example, and I liked it when I read it in high school, but I found it very hard to get through the sentimental portion early on, and some of the language, and even like the way the plot turns. I mean, there's a lot of very frustrating plot elements in that book that many people have discussed. However, it is an amazing book. And the second I picked it up outside of school, I actually fell in love with it. And there are many books like that I remember reading in high school And then later when I taught high school, they connected with me more. I mean, I loved them and came to adore them, but that I found really, really tricky when I was in high school, or just kind of, there's something about the environment of having to do the homework and discuss at school. And again, as a former teacher of high school and college, I find this kind of tragic, you know, like I always felt like, am I torturing these kids? And, you know, with the best of intentions, kind of passing on my favorites in a context where they're not going to like them. But yeah, around the same time that I was struggling with Jane Eyre, I think in high school, I picked up Anna Karenina, you know, that a friend of mine was reading, and just totally, it like changed everything for me.
Oh, wow.
And then I got very into Dostoevsky as well. And it's just all the things that I picked up on my own during high school became so much more influential. You know, and even when I circled back later and picked up those classics later, it's like I had to encounter them in a new frame. So I don't know what that means. I feel sad for English teachers everywhere. But I think it still did me. I think I was still instructed by those books.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding them on your own and sort of making the choice to read it on your own.
Yep.
It sounds like maybe one of those might be one of these, but were there specific authors and books that made you want to be a writer at that age or later?
I wanted to be a writer when I was in 4th grade, and I first decided that when my 4th grade teacher assigned us a free verse poetry assignment in 4th grade, which is again a very strange thing to put on a 4th grader's syllabus. But he was a poet himself and kind of a hippie, as I later, you know, retroactively realized. And it just turned on a light bulb in me. And we had moved in the middle of the school year, the year before, like across country. And so I think I really was very, very lonely, and, you know, was already resonating with the unicorn book and all these other things. And when he taught us about free verse poetry, I just started writing it like all the time, obsessively. And I started telling people I was going to be an author when I grew up that year.
That's amazing.
It was. I mean, it's too bad that it didn't happen right away, because I kind of thought it would happen like immediately in 5th grade or something, but instead it took a long time. I was into my 30s before my first book was published, or before I even tried, to be honest, to really publish. So.
Wow, but to have that self-awareness so early. Do you have any of those free verse poems that you
do?
Wrote?
Yeah, I have all of them somewhere.
Have you returned to them recently?
Not recently. I mean, I feel like I know them pretty well. I did really cherish them for a long time. You know, for a long time, they really gave me a sense of self, even through, you know, junior high and all the horrors and atrocities of junior high and high school. They really gave me a sense that I knew who I was. And I think, you know, when you become an adult, it becomes more complicated. You realize that actually it's not just about writing, you know, free verse poetry in your journal and then becoming an author. But in some ways it kind of is. But you have to go through some adult stuff first. So
I think it's nice that you had that confidence, though, because that's like a hard thing, I think, to get. In 4th grade, you're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write these free verse poems, and this is going to work out.
You know, it was more of a compulsion at the time, and I often wish I could get back to that. I hear a lot of writers saying that they just have to write. It's like what saves their life. And that's how I felt then. And I think I occasionally feel that. There's an urgency that I do feel, but then when you're writing novels, it takes a long time, and there's a lot of craft and revision involved, and there's a lot of it that just feels like hard work. Whereas when you're in 4th grade, just filling your journal with like all these, you know, scattered images of, you know, it's just it really was just something I did for my feelings, and and I did show them to my teacher, and my parents occasionally, but other than that, like, I wasn't trying to please anyone really, and that's a feeling I really miss as an adult writer. And I have to really make a conscious effort to get back to that place when I'm writing these days.
I could see that, how it'd be hard just to keep that joy of writing when you're dependent on, deadlines and just have an adult life.
Yeah, well, the pressure is really on. And I think my first book was more like that. Like when you write your first book, you don't know if it's going to get published. So you are writing for yourself in a way. And you think that once I get published, I'm going to know that I'm good and I'm going to feel like a real writer, and, the red carpet's going to be rolled out. And instead what happens is just suddenly it feels like there's eyes on you for the first time, and people waiting for your book. And their jobs, are dependent on whether you do your job well. And that becomes this whole other level of like adult career. But I mean, I think the joy is still there to find. You just, I'm still early in my career. This is just my third book or my third novel. So I'm still learning that, how to like take a deep breath and connect with my voice and still, be present for the other voices when they need me. So,
well, we're looking at your beautiful bookshelf, but how many books would you say are on your to be read pile? And what are a few you could share?
Oh no, it's so long.
This is a very selfish question for us because we always have super long reading lists, and we need validation that that's okay.
It is. There's like 1,000 plus. There may be a couple thousand right now on my Goodreads. It's a lot, yeah. And I was on Goodreads for years, but I didn't really do it in earnest, I think, until pandemic, this past year. I got really into it, and I just started keeping track of what I wanted on Goodreads, because I was ordering a lot of books from independent bookstores, trying to, and for my friends who had their releases coming out. So it's hard. It's hard to zero in on one without actually going and looking. But if you give me a second, I can find.
This has to be very validating for you, Erin, because I know your list is insanely long.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. I one time accidentally did the math too of like how many books I read a week and how many books are on my to be read list, and I was like, I'm not gonna outlive this list. What am I gonna do? And I had like a panic attack.
It'll never happen. Like you'll never get to all of them. But I like it because I feel like I stopped seeing it as an obligation and started seeing it more as an exploratory, curation or something. It's like a notebook, where I'm just jotting down ideas. And I like it. I've started, I still order a lot of books, but I've also started checking the library. My TBR is great for, quickly finding things to look at and to see if I can get from the library, because there's deep cuts that I might not buy right away. But, if they're at the library, I'll certainly check them out. And if I love them, I probably will buy them. Yeah, I'm looking at my TBR right now, and it's 1,200 long, and a couple, like the most recent one I think is I put The Adventures of Miss Barbara Pym, which is a biography of the wonderful British author Barbara Pym, coming out by Paula Byrne. I think that's coming out soon. And there's another one called Olympus, Texas by Stacy Swan. That's a debut I've been looking forward to a lot, set in my home state. And yeah, there's just a zillion. I could go on and on.
Thinking about, some of the books that you have been reading recently, and maybe some of those from bookstores or from the library, has there been a book that's really surprised you recently?
Yes, I've just been reading, and I'm still finishing, a collection of short stories called At the Mouth of the River of Bees
Oh,
by Kai Johnson. Her first name is K-I-J Johnson. That is one of those ones that I was talking about. I don't think I would have, I've just not heard much about it, but I saw it kind of come up on someone's Twitter or their Goodreads page, and I just added it, and then I happened to see it at the library, so I grabbed it, and it's just stunning. It's from Small Beer Press, which is the press that Kelly Link runs, and her taste is so impeccable. I love her work so much, and her press is always reliable for some really interesting stuff. So that surprised me. I was not expecting it.
that's so cool, and love the small press connection. They're always surprising.
Another small press release that just came out, it's getting a lot of attention, but I got to read it early, so I was super excited to see people getting so excited about it, is Chelsea Summers' A Certain Hunger, which, I mean, if there's any book you can call surprising, have you heard of this book?
I don't think so.
It just came out from Unnamed Press, and yeah, another small press release, and it's narrated from the point of view of a female serial killing cannibal who's in prison. It's her prison memoirs, and she's a food critic. Yeah, and she's a food critic.
She's a food critic?
Yes, and it is just luscious. The writing is very, very mannered and florid and beautiful, and it's just a gorgeous read, and I've just never read anything like it. It's also very disgusting. I mean, you have to have a strong stomach to read it. It's very visceral, but yeah, I just adored that book. Can't recommend it enough.
That's amazing. What a great premise. So would you say you normally find book recommendations?
All those different ways. I mean, mostly lately it has been online because of the pandemic. It's just the Twitter feed is full of them. I follow book Twitter, and the second I see something interesting, or even something I've never heard of, I just go look it up on Goodreads and, add it if it seems interesting. All my friends, I have a lot of author friends now, especially crime and mystery authors and suspense. And so they all have amazing taste and amazing books coming out. And so I add all of those and all of their recommendations. And I do have some friends on Goodreads that share my more esoteric tastes, and so I take recommendations from them all the time. So yeah, it's just a lot of places, but that's why I've really started leaning into Goodreads. I mean, not to kind of continually promote it.
Oh, we love it too. It's just a wonderful central location.
Yeah. There are. It's just one of the easiest ways to keep track of all that stuff, and I have found it really delightful as almost, an ersatz kind of coffee conversation with friends, over books. Like, instead of getting together and talking about books, I get on Goodreads and see what my friends are reading.
I can't wait till we can all actually sit around and talk about books.
That'd be nice.
That will be lovely.
Well, we should all have podcasts.
Well, we recommended Bad Habits a few episodes ago. Erin got to see an early copy, and she was very psyched about it.
Thank you.
We love your past books, too. We've been digging into the past catalog. Are there any particular books or authors that you think inspire some of your writing?
Oh, yeah. I often cite Patricia Highsmith. I think that's a kind of a gimme for a lot of authors of my generation. But the truth is that I had never heard of her for a long, long time. She was not as big, even 10 years ago, much less 20 years ago, or when I was in college. You just didn't hear very much about her outside of like crime and mystery writing circles. And then when I was in grad school, I had an advisor who, I think I had already read a couple of Highsmith by then, but she was really into Highsmith and kind of tipped me off on some of the deeper cuts, and I got pretty obsessed with her books. And then, this is almost embarrassing, but I always say it because it's true. But Henry James is kind of the author that is most inspires me. And when I am really having trouble reconnecting to my voice, I go back to his works and read them. And you have to be careful because he can really get in your head, and you can end up trying to write like Henry James, but I often, my first draft will feel really influenced by him, and then I'll go back and smooth it out and kind of rake all those long sentences out. But yeah, still the structure of many of my books sort of in my mind mimics the structure of his books, where there are maybe 2 or 3 or 4 major players, and they're all psyching each other out. They're all kind of manipulating each other in these very Baroque ways. That's the thing I really love when I read it in fiction, and I always want it in my fiction. And yeah, there's just something about the intense psychological labyrinths that Henry James takes you through, and especially in his later work, that really gets my brain in that groove and emboldens me to write frankly ridiculous things.
I mean, if Henry James did it,
Yeah.
Right?
damn it.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's working. We loved it.
And I could definitely see
Thank
those
you so much, Erin.
Yeah. We
I
did, really.
appreciate
And
that.
yeah, Amy and I had a couple of conversations actually when we recorded it, and then post, that we've both been reading other stuff that you wrote prior to that. And yeah, we both have enjoyed it very much. So Henry James or not, you're doing a good job.
Thank you.
We always like to ask, what's your most memorable fan interaction? And that could be, we've heard touching, funny, scary, amusing.
Oh, wow. Wow, what a question. I think the ones that really get to me have been emails I've gotten mostly after my first book, some after my second too, but from people who have been, who've had like various traumatic experiences, and something I wrote in the book spoke to them and seemed real or true, and maybe even healing in some tiny way. And that, yeah, it's hard to beat that. I feel so honored when somebody takes my books seriously, because I intend them, even though they can be rather silly, but I intend them extremely seriously, and they touch on topics that I really care about, like the effect of trauma in women's lives and marginalized people's lives. And yeah, so I think, that got very very intense very quickly, but it's really true. Those have been the ones that I remember forever, are kind of the ones where, people say, oh, this happened to me, and you wrote about it, and it did something positive for me.
Wow. I can see that being very touching and also a little heavy too,
Yeah.
to hear that and to, wow.
It is super heavy. I also like the people from Houston who can recognize Houston in my first book. I love that. But I feel like that's not specific enough, but it's hard to answer that question without giving people away, because I think
Yeah.
What, especially thinking pre-pandemic, maybe when your first and second book came out, were there other authors that you really wanted to meet and to talk to, and you did, and it went well?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's such a hard question to answer, because like, yes and no, because there are authors I venerate, Megan Abbott, Laura Littman, Tana French, Sarah Waters. I don't know, I could list like, a dozen more, but I'm really bad at meeting people in real life that I kind of, part of me just wants, if I love someone's work, part of me wants to never talk to them. And I'm kind of afraid of them as a real person, not because they're going to disappoint me, but because I don't know how to act toward a person who I care that much about their work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, surely you do at this point.
Absolutely. No, we do. Like, we think about this all the time, that we are such spazzes when it comes to like people we really, really love. And yeah.
So am I. I mean, I have
Mhm.
made some terrible gaffes. Before I actually wrote novels, or before I started writing my first novel, I was a freelance kind of cultural critic, or books journalist, I guess. And so I was interviewing a lot, and I was really scrapping it out. I had no background in journalism, didn't know how to do an interview or record things, and I just contacted people and foisted myself on them. And so I actually kind of approached it from the beginning with this, I don't know, this kind of wild audacity. And then when I actually was in a position to be an author on like a similar footing, it's like I didn't know how to really transfer that. Like I still see it as this amazing thing when somebody bestows their presence on me. And then, but at the same time, all my friends are authors. I know we're just real people, and so it's like I have two conflicting personalities. But I'm like that with all celebrities. I am terrible with any celebrity encounter. I have, the gaffes I have made would just make you laugh if I could share them. If I felt like sharing them.
Yeah.
If it helps, I think you're in good company, because we've talked to so many authors that feel the exact same way, and they had like a lot of good interactions, but the ones they remember are where they're just, acted like idiots, or felt like they acted like idiots. So
Oh my God.
you're not alone,
True.
Amy.
Yeah. I mean, luckily authors are also extremely gracious people mostly. And so, they've all been there, and they're just like, yeah, okay, kid.
Calm down.
Well, I think we're benefiting too from the pandemic Zoom call thing, because if like we met these people in person, it would be a lot more, like Amy said, it'd be a lot more spastic. We'd be like, oh my
Wouldn't know
God.
what to do with our-
I love your shoes. I'm always if it's a woman, I'm always like, I love your shoes. Or like, where did you get that bag? It's like I just freeze up and start complimenting their clothes like an idiot. Anyway.
Oh, your go-to is gender stuff. Just like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't actually. Oh, I'm about to say something terrible, but I was going to say I don't really feel that way about male authors.
We don't really either. So
I don't really have that relationship with a whole lot of male authors. Some, I should say, but
Totally understand. Yep. How would you say your readings changed since you became a published author?
Well, I read a lot more crime, because I did not really read mysteries or suspense or crime before. I did not seek it out. I did read, I read a lot of everything, but I wouldn't have ever said, oh, I love mysteries before I wrote, a psychological suspense novel. So, and in fact, I was not intending to write one. It just like, that's how it ended up looking. And so I ran with it. But I have sunk into the genre quite a lot, and spent the past 5 years really just developing a sense for what's out there and for what I like. And I have all these friends writing them as well now. So I read their books whenever, as many as I possibly can, and love them. So that's the main change. But I would also say that I just feel I feel more freedom to explore genres in general. And, I've started reading a lot of horror lately. I'm thinking of picking up a romance, which I've never really done before. Because I think, before I published, I had this idea about, the role of genres in literary life. And even though I had read many things like Patricia Highsmith and such that are considered cornerstones of these genres, and even Laura Lippman and some other ones, and Tana French. But I just, I think I did not realize that, genre is a marketing category, and it's not really, it's useful for getting audiences to recognize, and, getting the audience to the book. It's kind of or getting the book to the audience.
Yeah.
But it's not really always the most useful descriptive category. And some of the most amazing work happens in genres, in genre, so-called genre writing. And yeah, I just have a very different and more nuanced relationship to, I think, to literature as a whole than I did before I was actually on the shelf.
That makes a lot of sense. We've talked about that a lot, about how genre can be sort of limiting for a lot of people. Like readers may think, oh, I'm not going to read anything in that genre because, whatever. Whereas we found the biggest surprises sometimes in those different genres. We can say read a book, doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's so freeing, right? It's just so wonderful. Pandemic has been like that for me too, even more, because I feel like I'm just more ready to experiment with different things than I was. I just like, the world is burning. Like, who cares?
Yeah,
who cares?
Well, we had a difficult time at the beginning of the pandemic getting into books. And so I think we had to sort of look outside our normal genres that we liked or normal, categorization.
I was actually looking on the shelf to see if I still have this one book. The book that broke me out of my pandemic slump was The Return by Rachel Harrison, which is a psychological horror novel. It's kind of funny as well.
Ooh.
It's like, it's sort of Girls Trip plus The Shining. It's really a riveting horror novel written sort of for women about women's lives.
Breaking the pandemic slump.
Yes, because it was so scary and suspenseful. Chapter by chapter, I would stay up reading it, and it was so visceral. A lot of people really looked to comfort reads, especially early on, and I found that I couldn't read anything unless it was so gripping that it was like scarier than reality, and I had to keep reading.
Yep.
So
what do you think, do you have one particular book that you always recommend to people that you think everyone should read?
That's a hard one, because I don't actually believe everyone should read any one book.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah. I don't care what people read. And I do recommend a lot of books. I have one that I recommend widely if people are specifically looking for a comfort read that has a lot of depth. I always recommend Tove Jansson, The Summer Book. That's a kind of series of short vignettes. It's a really delightful book. It's gentle, but it's not saccharine or simplistic. And all of her work is amazing, but that book is one I recommend most. I have found myself recommending that in the past year the most. But yeah, I just don't. Required reading for the entire human race does not exist. Life is short.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good TV too. Movies are also very good. But if people come to me asking, well, I want to read Henry James, but I don't know where to start, and I only have like one book in my I only have one space on my mental shelf for Henry James, like which one? I can usually come up with recommendations like that for each author or each genre. But yeah, I just think you gotta read what you love and just don't listen to people who are trying to push stuff on you. That's just like English class, that's like high school.
Just read a book, Erin.
Just read a book.
You guys need to pick up some books and read them.
Yeah.
You clearly need this advice.
Well, we always ask at the end of our episodes, we usually talk about something we're obsessed with in pop culture that we're recommending. Do you have a current pop culture obsession or more than one? Your face feels like we're getting something good.
Oh yeah, we count.
No,
podcasts, everything.
Yeah, anything. Yeah.
The names of the things that I love always escape me right when I want them. The truth is, actually, it's funny I said TV, because I have not been able to watch a lot of TV during the pandemic. I am watching a good amount of movies, but for whatever reason, TV is harder for me. during the pandemic. Megan Abbott's cheerleading series, Dare Me, is pretty great. Delightful. There's a comedy series. It's comedy. It's like very short little comedy episodes. And I think it was an Adult Swim show. And it's called Joe Pera Talks With You. This was one of the things that I watched kind of obsessively with my husband early in the pandemic that was comforting. It's just this kind of this sort of Midwestern guy. He's a young comedian, but he sort of has the affect of like an old Midwestern gentleman kind of shuffling around. And they're just these little tiny episodes. They're like, you know, if you ever once loved Prairie Home Companion back when you were young, this is like 100 times better and funnier. It's just very, very sharp comedy. It's kind of wince comedy, but it also has a deep heart. And they're like 10 minutes long. Like,
That's
so, yeah. It's a very soothing series, and my husband and I definitely returned to it when we were, you know, feeling super stressed out. I don't even know if that counts as pop culture.
Oh, it's
like,
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
You know, one thing, I was looking at your biography on the website, and it mentions that you like cake decorating.
oh yeah, I do.
Something you've been doing during the pandemic?
I did. I made 2 cakes that were, I think you could say, excessively elaborate Sesame Street character cakes for my son. I know. And one of them, the first one was Cookie Monster, and it was kind of like a bust of Cookie Monster eating a bunch of cookies. And they're like 3-dimensional, they, you know, stand up and stuff. And they're really fun. You know, I don't have an excuse to make cakes for myself anymore that are fancy, but I made my wedding cake, and I have made, you know, special occasion cakes in the past. But yeah, when you have a kid, it's one of the great things about having a kid is that you have an excuse to do something, you know, like I'll always have an excuse to make a silly cake now and spend, you know, 8 hours decorating something.
Maybe that's what you need to do for your book launch day, is make yourself a cake.
I thought about it, actually.
That's a great idea.
I know. I'm actually kicking myself for not doing it with the other 2 because Bad Habits has, I think, the least amenable one. It's all gray and black, and I love it. This is my favorite cover by far, but the others were very bright colors. It's very hard to get a cake to look appetizing when it's got gray and black icing, as I have learned.
But you'll know that it's appetizing because
it's true. Well, it's appetizing to read. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you need to do a bookshelf with all of the covers since you didn't do it, and then you could bring in all the colors.
That's smart, and I will consider it. I have always wanted a book cake. I have always wanted one, so I should just make one this time. There's no pressure. The great thing is that there's not going to be an in-person release.
Exactly.
So if it doesn't go well, I just like I won't take pictures of it.
Exactly. Yeah. But if it does, then you've given yourself a full treat.
I love it. Yeah. It's my dream to write a book about cake, and I don't even know what that means, but like it could be a horror novel, it could be a nonfiction book about cake. I just really want to write a book about cake, and I've always wanted that. And
I highly support that.
100%.
Yeah. Along with some recipes.
Yeah.
Erin,
I know.
You were a little nervous going in because you liked her.
I do.
lot.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
A big fan. But
And she delivered.
yes, but she immediately put me at ease because she's such an authentic, genuine person.
It's wonderful. I liked that she knew she wanted to be a writer since 4th grade.
Yes. And that she wrote free verse poetry as a kid. And that sparked her love because who didn't try a little free verse poetry?
I really wish that she had them handy.
Yes.
And that she had read some.
I wish that I had some of my free verse poetry. I wouldn't read it either, but
I really liked too how she got pretty honest about how writing as a career, it's a lot more pressure. It's a lot less freedom, perhaps. a little less drive to write. And I really appreciated that she was kind of honest about that, because I bet that's totally true for a lot of writers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I particularly related to the fact that she has a TBR list in the thousands. I felt seen.
Yeah.
I felt justified.
Yeah.
Because mine is ridiculous.
I was watching you real carefully, and I could tell your whole countenance
Yes.
was lit up.
It was.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, kindred spirit.
I liked also that she admitted she's fairly awkward when it comes to meeting heroes or people that she admires, which, man, we've said before, if this was an in-person interview with all
man.
these authors, we would burn a lot of bridges.
It would be terrible.
People would file restraining orders. It would not be pretty.
I don't even think we'd get to the in-person
That's true.
part because it would just be too much. My head would explode, and they would get a sense beforehand that just like this isn't.
Or, yeah, you're right. Maybe we would have panic attacks and just cancel beforehand.
Yes. Yeah, for
that's
sure.
true.
I love that she also used what we've been using lately, which is just read a book.
Just read a book.
It doesn't matter the genre. And we've had that discussion a couple times lately that sometimes defining the genre can really cut people out of
really
some
can.
great reads.
Yeah. And she talked about being surprised by books in different genres. I also like that she doesn't have one book recommendation for everyone. She just said, just read. It doesn't matter what you read. Just find something that you love.
Yeah.
Which is great. Just read a book.
That was just read a book. Preferably one of Amy Gentry's. Also, we have to cover at the end the cake decorating. And she has this dream to write a book about cake.
Also, she made her own wedding cake.
Made her own wedding cake.
We tried to convince her to make a cake for her book launch, maybe with a library. She kind of gave us a maybe response. So I doubt that it'll happen.
No.
But man, it was nice spitballing ideas.
It was.
With Amy
It was
Gentry.
nice to feel part of the process,
was.
even though I know I'm not. And she was like, no, you don't get it. Still, I felt like I was there for a minute.
She's like, I'm the one that's going to have to take 8 hours to decorate this damn thing.
Yeah,
So,
stop.
no.
No, it's not going to happen.
But it is impressive.
It also
I
says
can-
something about her level of handling pressure. You made your own
Man.
wedding cake? Come
Yeah.
on. Wow.
That's intense. Well, guess what? We'll be back next Wednesday with our regular weekly themed episodes.
We sure will. In the meantime, happy reading.